Hello and welcome back to NewsX. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching Focal Length, where we take a closer look at the pressing political and economic stories that are not just making headlines but reshaping our world. In today's episode, we are speaking with one of the most respected voices on a critical issue that is having an impact on communities across the world, the fentanyl epidemic. Fentanyl is a synthetic drug which has contributed to a soaring number of overdose deaths in the United States, leaving families shattered and communities struggling to cope with the widespread destruction that it causes. It has infiltrated the drug market in ways that continue to baffle authorities and health professionals. Our guest today is Mr. Robert G. Kanter, a world-renowned international media commentator, a recovery advocate and an empowering leader, with decades of experience addressing addiction and substance abuse issues. Mr. Canter is widely recognised for his expertise in tackling the fentanyl crisis. His unique insights and dedicated advocacy have made him a key figure in shaping public discourse and policy surrounding the devastating epidemic. Robert G. Canter, thank you very much for joining us today. Let's kick off our conversation by looking at the bold moves made by President Trump in his second term. His trade tariff threats to China, Canada and Mexico are a key part of his administration's approach. But do you think these tariffs could play a role in reducing the devastating impact of fentanyl deaths in the US?
First of all, thank you for having me here. It's an honor and privilege to be on your network and to discuss such an important topic. In relation to your question, no, I do not think the tariffs are going to have any effect whatsoever, specifically on China and its production of the precursor chemicals that are used to manufacture fentanyl and fentanyl analogs. And I think that China is so far advanced in its infiltration of our infrastructure and money laundering techniques and schemes that we're just way too ahead of the eight ball, as they say. We're too far behind the eight ball in terms of being able to do anything about the flow of illicit drugs into this country. So no, the tariffs are really absolutely meaningless as far as I'm concerned.
Speaking about fentanyl, its use in the US remains alarmingly unchecked, according to some, despite all the awareness campaigns and policy efforts. Why do you think it is like that?
Well, no, it is checked. It is checked. There is a tremendous amount of treatment resources in this country. The problem is the volume that's coming in, and we have now what's called a polysubstance epidemic. And so it's not just fentanyl, but fentanyl and methamphetamine are being mixed together. Methamphetamine, of course, being a stimulant. Carfentanil, which is far more potent than fentanyl, also is now showing up in the drug supply. And the term that's used on the street is stepped on, meaning that many different drugs are being mixed together and being sold. And so they're also more difficult to trace by the DEA. Now, the reason, by the way, the overdose numbers have come down is because the fentanyl itself is less potent than it used to be. So it's not a matter of that it's unchecked. It's unchecked as it relates to the amount of fentanyl and other illicit substances that are getting into this country. That's really the piece that's unchecked, as opposed to the treatment. You have to understand fentanyl is such a highly, highly addictive illicit drug that, you know, the common question is, well, if there are so many overdose fatalities, then why do the overdose numbers keep rising? Shouldn't they keep going down? But it's such a potent, addictive drug that for every one fatality that occurs, there are 3 more individuals that become addicted. That's how potent it is. But we are seeing a reduction in the potency in the drug supply chain, and we're seeing a mixing of many different substances, which is why we now call it a polysubstance epidemic.
Moving on, and in recent years, we've seen a slight drop in fentanyl-related deaths. What factors do you think have contributed to this small but potentially significant shift?
Right. It is a slight drop. That's the right terminology. And again, as I just mentioned, the potency is not as strong as it used to be. And so you're seeing less overdose fatalities there. You know, there have been a number of articles written on who gets the credit for this drop. And you could look to many, many different factors. It could be the increase of access to treatment. It could be the increase in use of Narcan, naloxone, which is really has been on the rise and has been a great help. You can talk about awareness campaigns. You can talk about the amount of education that's being brought into school auditoriums. There are a lot of individuals and organizations that want to take credit. So to answer your question, there are a multitude of factors that have contributed into the numbers declining in overdose fatalities in the United States.
Yes, and it's important to remember that the opioid epidemic didn't appear overnight. Can you please walk us through how fentanyl made its way into the US market and when it first began to reach the hands of drug users?
Well, the fentanyl has been around for decades. It's been used as a very potent pain medication in hospitals and in a hospital setting. It's only when the synthesis of fentanyl began, because both the chemical manufacturers in China, under the direction of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, so that it was really a form of warfare where they could produce the chemicals. There are so many chemical producing plants in China. They could produce those chemicals. They could sell those chemicals to the drug cartels in Mexico, specifically Sinaloa and JNG, Jalisco New Generation, and there are others. And because fentanyl is so cheap to produce, so inexpensive, and it can produce in so many different places, whether it's in a basement or in a bathroom or out in the jungle, and it's so small and it's so easy to smuggle, that all of these entities realize the profitability. And so, to answer your question, really, fentanyl came onto the picture probably about 5 years ago in terms of it really um, seeing a spike in this country in the overdose fatalities, with fentanyl being found in the toxicology reports.
Let's now look at a potential solution. When it comes to combating fentanyl addiction, what more can the government do to assist with treatment and recovery? And what kind of support do you think is truly needed?
The government is providing support. So when you say providing support, I'm assuming you mean financial support. And the financial support goes into many different areas. You could talk about funding, increasing funding for the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, and the CBT, Customs and Border Patrol. You can talk about funding for community programs, for distribution of naloxone. There is funding, there's legislation as it relates to telehealth to allow for medication-assisted treatment done health-wise as opposed to in person. That increases treatment, which reduces fatalities. So really, the government can and does support the treatment and addressing this epidemic in a number of different ways. It's not just one specific avenue of funding.
Fentanyl's extreme potency is what makes it so lethal, but its dangers go far beyond just the overdose risk. What other hidden risks does this drug pose?
Well, the risk is that you go into an individual that uses a lethal amount of fentanyl, which really is the amount of your thumbnail, your thumb finger. It depends really on the actual potency of that particular cut. But they travel into what's called hypoxia, which it means that the person stops breathing. And that's why the administration of naloxone, Narcan, is so important, is to reverse the hypoxia and to allow that person to begin breathing again. That, in essence, is what happens. You stop breathing, and obviously, if you stop breathing for a long enough period, you will die.
To wrap up our conversation, a question on many people's minds: is there really a path to eliminate fentanyl addiction in the US, and what kind of bold measures do you think are necessary to make that a reality?
You see, that's a really difficult question to answer. It's a really, really difficult question to answer because um, the source of the problem is the CCP. I don't say China, I don't say the Chinese people, I say CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. Um, they have infiltrated our the money laundering schemes, the underground banking schemes that they have currently in place are extremely sophisticated and extremely hard to track and extremely clandestine and extremely dangerous. The average American citizen does not have any idea to the extent of what we're talking about. And, you always want to go to the source of where the problem is. And in my estimation, or my opinion, as an advocate, as someone that comments on this and speaks to this around the world, um, the source is China. The source, rather, is a CCP. And you could pour all the money you want into, a border um, enforcement. That's not going to solve the problem. You have to remember that, the CCP, along with the drug traffickers, the Sinaloa cartel, and so forth, are always 2 or 3 steps ahead of us. They're always producing the next addictive product that they're going to be sending here. The profits are just too big. They have just infiltrated too much our underground banking system. They've created an underground banking system, very sophisticated money laundering techniques, really infiltration of social media, especially in chat rooms. And so, again, I don't have access to classified information, right? I'm just an advocate and a media commentator. But I would tell you all roads lead to China, to CCP. And that diplomatically is what's going to have to be addressed. And that's the only way, because if there's unlimited amount of, for example, of precursor chemicals that are produced by the CCP manufacturing plants in China, there will be an endless amount of substance to be used to synthesize fentanyl by the cartels. And don't forget, by the way, China also, the CCP also does produce a smaller amount of fentanyl itself and sends it into the United States, or sends it into packaging areas very close to the American border, where they are repackaged into much smaller packages to be able to be shipped through Amazon. So to answer your question, the source is the CCP, and that somehow has to be addressed diplomatically. Dropping bombs at the border and more troops at the border is great. It can help, but I don't think it's going to solve the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Canter, for joining us on Focal Length. And with that, it's a wrap for this episode. For more of your latest international news updates, stay tuned to NewsX.